I want to formalize everything we've said so far and put it in a structure that I think captures the material very concisely in a condensed fashion, and allows us then to make comparisons more easily. I've got the three positions that we've looked at: ethical principle of egoism, ethical principle of predation, ethical principle of altruism. Not yet judging which one is true and which of the other two is false, but just using them as categories describing the principles behind various sorts of ethical behavior that are out there, or internally to various modes of thinking and behaving in the world that humans will engage in, what the ethical rationale for that mode of behavior and thinking would be. And along the left column here, I've got three dimensions. I think each of these needs to be characterized in three dimensions. One is, as human beings, our actions, if they're to be morally evaluated actions, they're actions that we choose, and we choose to engage in them because we have a reason or a motivation right at work. So what we can ask is, what's the intent right behind the action that a person engages in? We're also interested in the existential consequences of our actions. We behave or we act in the world, and there are certain results. And there are two then morally relevant dimensions here. What are the effect of one's actions on oneself? So we can ask what the consequences of the actions to oneself are. And then to the extent that other people are involved or one's actions affects them, we can ask what is the effect of one's actions on those other people. And then we can then define the three positions in terms of how differently they fill in the cells along those three dimensions. Now, the idea behind egoism is the idea that one is an end in oneself. One's life is one's own, and so one is striving to achieve a flourishing life or the happiest life that one can possibly live. And so one's intent is a self-interested intent. Now, built into egoism is a content notion about what one's interests are, right? That one's interests are best served by achieving one's health, achieving a career in which one can be productively creative, being self-responsible and self-supporting then becomes a value, having loving family relationships, enjoying beauty and artistic experiences, and so on. But the idea then is that if one's intent is governed by pursuit of those interests, then one is functioning in an egoistic fashion. That one should then engage in actions that do satisfy, right, one's interests, that is to say, engage in actions that benefit oneself, right? Go to college to get one's degree, have a career that pays you the kind of money, right, that you want, and so forth. And then built into egoism is the idea that self-interest properly defined and pursued by the individual will have the effect on other individuals either of leaving them neutral. You know, if, for example, I am in my study at the end of a day, sipping a glass of wine and listening to some music, I'm acting in my self-interest, increasing my state of flourishing in the world. I'm engaging in action that is very beneficial to me, but nobody else is affected by that action, so they are left neutral. Or I engage in actions that have a beneficial effect on other people. So, for example, if I go into business, for example, as a career, if someone is voluntarily paying me money, well, I'm acting on my self-interest, trying to advance my career and my other life goals, and I am getting the paycheck from the person who is paying me, so that is to my benefit. But presumably, there's a voluntary trade. I am providing some value to the other person that they value more than the paycheck they're paying me, so that person is benefiting as well. Or if I have a friendship with someone, I will, say, go out on a weekend evening with that person. I enjoy that person's company, so I benefit and my self-interest is thereby served. But if the person is a genuine friend of mine, then presumably my spending time with them is also a great benefit to them, and so that person is benefiting as well. And the idea of egoism then is that moral actions and the right kinds of actions for the individuals involved, and to the extent that we are social, mutually beneficial to all of the individuals involved, are actions that are described in these three dimensions by those concepts there. Now, we know that the predatory approach to ethics thinks very differently, right, about the values. It does think in terms of self-interest as the appropriate kind of intent, right, that one should seek, right, one's own interests. Under most predatory ethics, though, interests are defined rather differently there. Interests are defined in terms of the satisfaction of desires, such as the greed desire, the lust desire, the desire for revenge, and so on, captured in the myth of Gyges, as we have seen. So one should then, of course, act in a way that satisfies one's interests. So the consequences to oneself of the various actions that one intentionally undergoes should be beneficial, but the predator will argue that the nature of human social relationship is necessarily zero-sum. We are in a conflict-driven world, so necessarily my benefit is going to be matched by your loss. Your benefit will be matched by my loss, or I will intentionally sacrifice you, right, if necessary, to achieve the benefit that I want. And so the predatory ethic will argue that the best kind of actions, or the actions that systematically pursued, are going to achieve the best kind of life, are going to be actions that involve these three dimensions coming into existence at the same time. Now, by contrast, then, the altruists juxtapose themselves to both the egoistic approach and the predatory approach. And what they argue is the root problem is this notion of self-interest that is common to the egoist and the predatory approach, and the notion that one should be striving to benefit oneself. So instead, if we're going to achieve the socially desirable behaviors, what we need to teach people is not to put their self-interest first, rather to see themselves as of less moral significance, of less importance, and so to be guided by the motivation or an intent of selflessness, to engage in actions that have as an effect or a consequence rather on other people, a social benefit. The most important concern is the effect of one's actions on others. Are they contributing to the social welfare or removing a potential loss, right, to the social welfare? And given the altruistic approach, the thing that is necessary to individuals is that they be willing to sacrifice, or that they have to suffer a loss, right, of some sort. And so the best kind of person, or the morally ideal kind of person, is going to be someone who is systematically devoted to selfless sacrifice, right, for the benefit of others. All right, so what we then have is a nice matrix here that arrays the three different approaches. Each is distinct, and it puts us in a position to contrast them, the dimensions along which they're similar and the dimensions along which they differ. Clearly, the egoists and the predators agree on what the guiding intent would be, although they would define self-interest differently in both categories. Both agree that one should act to achieve one's benefit, but they disagree on the nature of achieving one's self-interest in terms of its effect on other people. The predatory approach argues for a zero-sum approach, whereas the egoist approach argues for a win-win approach, or mutually beneficial approach. We can say that the altruist and the predatory approach, they both agree on, actually down here, on this principle here, that we do live in a world of zero-sum, or a conflict world, that moral transactions, or necessarily human social transactions that have a moral component to it, involve someone benefiting at someone's expense. But then that points up the immediate difference. The altruists and the advocates of the predatory ethic want to assign the benefits and losses differently. The predatory approach advocating a self-interested approach, while the altruists are selfless. The predators are putting the individual self above the social, and the altruists are doing the exact opposite. All right, that's an abstract characterization.